There is a growing body of evidence showing that hormonal disruptions can change how genes are expressed, not by mutating DNA, but by modifying how it's read. These changes can persist across generations. That means the exposures of today can shape the health of children not yet born. This is where the conversation stops being academic and starts being moral. You don't have to be a parent to understand responsibility. You only need to understand cause and effect. Every system, whether financial or biological, rewards foresight and punishes ignorance. Not because it's cruel, but because it's consistent. Here's a line I often come back to: nature does not negotiate, but it always keeps receipts. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. This sounds overwhelming. It sounds like everything is toxic, everything is dangerous, and the solution is to live in fear. That reaction is understandable and wrong. Awareness is not fear. Awareness is precision. The goal is not to eliminate every exposure. That's impossible. The goal is to stop bleeding from the biggest wounds first. This is not about perfection, it's about leverage. Small, intelligent changes in high-impact areas produce outsized results. Think like an investor. You don't need to optimize every dollar. You need to stop the worst losses and redirect capital toward compounding assets. Health works the same way. If you remove major estrogenic inputs, the body often recalibrates with astonishing speed. Hormones normalize. Inflammation decreases, energy returns, fat distribution changes. Fertility markers improve, not because you forced the body, but because you stopped interfering with it. This is why I don't frame this conversation as restriction. I frame it as liberation. Every artificial estrogen you remove is a false signal silent. Every clean input you choose is a message of clarity sent. Over time, clarity compounds. Here's another principle worth writing down. The body is not fragile, but it is honest. It responds exactly to what it's given. If you give it confusion, it adapts with dysfunction. If you give it clarity, it adapts with strength. The reason this message matters so deeply to me is because I've seen both sides. I've seen what happens when people dismiss subtle exposures because they don't feel urgent. And I've seen what happens when people reclaim control with intention and intelligence. The difference is not discipline, it's understanding. Discipline without understanding creates burnout. Understanding creates alignment. As we move forward in this series, we'll talk about where these estrogenic signals come from, why they persist, and how to dismantle their influence without turning your life upside down. This is not a call to panic, it's a call to competence. The modern world will not slow down for your biology. But you can slow down what enters your body. And in doing so, you gain something rare in this age: sovereignty, health sovereignty, biological independence, a future not dictated by invisible chemistry. And that's where this journey really begins. At some point in every real conversation about health, someone asks the question that sounds reasonable but carries a dangerous assumption. They ask, if these exposures are really that bad, why aren't we all collapsing? And it's a fair question until you understand how the body actually fails. The body rarely collapses. It compensates, and compensation looks like survival, not health. Your body is the most sophisticated problem solver you will ever own. When signals are distorted, it doesn't give up. It reroutes, it stores, it suppresses, it adapts. And those adaptations keep you alive while quietly moving you further from optimal function. This is why estrogenic exposure doesn't announce itself with alarms. It announces itself with trends. Trends like rising obesity despite calorie awareness. Trends like declining testosterone across generations. Trends like infertility becoming common instead of rare. Trends like autoimmune disorders appearing earlier and more frequently. Trends like depression and anxiety becoming normalized instead of questioned. None of these trends exist in isolation. They share a hormonal fingerprint. One of the most misunderstood roles of estrogen, especially when artificially activated, is its relationship with fat. Estrogen doesn't just influence fat storage. It instructs fat tissue on what to do. Fat is not passive storage. Fat is an active endocrine organ. It produces hormones, stores chemicals, and communicates with the brain. When estrogenic chemicals enter the body, fat becomes both a target and a vault. Here's the cruel irony. Estrogenic compounds are lipophilic, meaning they love fat. They dissolve into it. The more fat you have, the more storage capacity you create for the very chemicals that promote fat accumulation in the first place. This is not a character flaw. This is a biochemical feedback loop. Once stored, these compounds don't just sit quietly. They leak slowly, persistently. They create a background level of hormonal interference that never quite shuts off. This is one of the reasons fat loss becomes harder, not easier, over time for many people. The body isn't just fighting calories, it's fighting chemistry. Now layer insulin into that picture. Estrogenic signaling disrupts insulin sensitivity. Disrupted insulin signaling promotes fat storage. Fat storage increases estrogenic burden. And suddenly, weight gain is no longer about willpower. It's about a system caught in a loop. When people tell me they're eating less, moving more, and still gaining weight, I don't assume they're lying. I assume their hormonal environment is compromised. The same logic applies to muscle. Testosterone and estrogen exist in balance. Artificial estrogenic signaling tilts valence. Muscle protein synthesis declines, recovery slows, strength fades, and because muscle is metabolically protective, its loss accelerates everything else. This isn't just about aesthetics. Muscle is insurance. It protects against insulin resistance, bone loss, cognitive decline, and frailty. Undermining muscle is like canceling your health insurance while still paying the premiums. Then there's the immune system. Estrogenic compounds don't just interfere with reproduction, they interfere with immune signaling. Chronic, low-grade inflammation becomes the norm. Allergies appear where none existed before. Autoimmune conditions rise. The immune system, like every other system, depends on clean communication. Confused signals create confused responses. Now let's talk about fertility, not as a personal issue, but as a societal indicator. Fertility is one of the most sensitive measures of environmental health. When fertility declines across populations, something fundamental has shifted. Sperm counts have dropped dramatically over the last several decades. Egg quality is declining. Puberty timing is changing. These are not lifestyle quirks. These are biological alarms. Reproductive systems are exquisitely hormone dependent. They don't tolerate noise well. Artificial estrogenic exposure acts like a broadcast hijack. It disrupts timing, development, and signaling at every stage. And here's the part that should unsettle you if you're paying attention. These disruptions don't always correct themselves when exposure stops. Some changes imprint. Some effects persist. Some consequences are inherited. This is where the conversation moves beyond personal optimization and into legacy. We often talk about inheritance as money, property, or values. But biology is the first inheritance. Long before a child inherits your habits or beliefs, they inherit the cellular environment shaped by your exposures. This is not abstract theory. This is observable biology. Hormonal environments influence gene expression. Gene expression influences development. Development influences lifelong health trajectories. In other words, what you're exposed to today can shape the health of someone who doesn't exist yet. Now, I want to pause here, not to dramatize, but to ground this in responsibility. Responsibility does not mean guilt. Responsibility means responsibility, the ability to respond intelligently once you understand the system. Most people never get this chance. They're told to manage symptoms, not systems. They're taught to medicate outcomes, not question inputs. That's not medicine, that's maintenance. True health is not maintained, it's cultivated, and cultivation requires long-term thinking. This is where financial freedom principles apply with brutal precision. People who build wealth don't chase quick wins. They reduce unnecessary losses. They avoid toxic assets. They invest in compounding returns. Health works the same way. If you constantly expose your body to estrogenic interference, you're investing in volatility. You're trading long-term stability for short-term convenience. And just like bad financial decisions, the real cost shows up later when correction is harder and options are fewer. What frustrates me is not that these chemicals exist. It's that we pretend their effects are isolated. They're not. They're cumulative. They interact. They amplify each other. No single exposure destroys health. It's the background hum, the constant low-level signal distortion, the never-ending drip that erodes resilience over years. This is why people feel awful without being sick. Why lab values come back at normal while life feels anything but. Why doctors struggle to connect dots when the dots don't show up as emergencies. Systems fail quietly before they fail loudly. The good news, and there is good news, is that systems can recover when interference is removed. The body wants balance. It doesn't resist healing. It resists confusion. When estrogenic noise decreases, clarity returns. Hormonal rhythms reemerge. Feedback loops stabilize. Energy becomes reliable instead of volatile. Fat becomes fuel instead of storage. Mood becomes resilient instead of reactive. This doesn't happen overnight, but it happens predictably. And predictability is power. You don't need to control everything. You need to control what matters most. High-impact exposures, daily inputs, repeated decisions. This is not about living in a bubble. It's about refusing to outsource your biology to systems that profit from ignorance. Here's the line I want you to remember from this part. Your body is not failing. You're just finally seeing the bill. And bills can be paid. Debt can be reversed. Systems can be restructured, but only if you stop pretending the charges are imaginary. In the next part, we'll start pulling back the curtain on where these estrogenic pressures actually come from and why they're so pervasive in modern life. Because once you understand the source, avoidance stops feeling extreme and starts feeling obvious. And that's when real change becomes inevitable. Once you understand the consequences, the next question becomes unavoidable. Where is all of this actually coming from? Because problems that feel invisible tend to feel unsolvable, and I want to do the opposite of that. I want to make the invisible visible, not so you become paranoid, but so you become precise. Most people imagine exposure as something dramatic, a factory spill, a contaminated site, a rare event. But the most powerful exposures are the boring ones, the everyday ones. The ones so normalized that questioning them feels extreme. Modern estrogenic exposure doesn't come from one villain. It comes from a system designed for speed, scale, and profit, none of which are aligned with biological harmony. Let's start with the simplest and most underestimated route: contact. Your skin is not armor. It is a gateway. It absorbs, it transports, it communicates. When you put something on your skin, you are not decorating yourself, you are dosing yourself. Many personal care products contain compounds that either mimic estrogen directly or interfere with hormone metabolism. Lotions, shampoos, soaps, cosmetics, fragrances, these are not occasional exposure. They are daily rituals. Repeated signals delivered directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the body's natural detox checkpoints. What makes this especially problematic is eximing. These exposures often happen first thing in the morning and last thing at night when hormonal signaling is most sensitive. And because they're marketed as a self-care, people never question them. But self-care that disrupts endocrine balance is not care. It's camouflage. Now move to food. Not just what you eat, but how it's produced, processed, and packaged. Food is information. It tells your body what environment it's in. When food carries estrogenic signals, it sends mixed messages. Certain agricultural chemicals are estrogenic by design. Plastics used in food packaging can leach estrogen-mimicking compounds, especially when heated or reused. Canned foods, plastic containers, plastic-lined wrappers. None of these were designed with hormonal signaling in mind. They were designed for shelf life and convenience. And again, the issue is not one meal, it's repetition. Exposure layered on exposure, day after day, year after year. Water deserves special attention because it feels pure by default, but water reflects its environment. Pharmaceutical residues, agricultural runoff, industrial byproducts, all can find their way into water systems. Even when present at low levels, constant ingestion matters. Remember this principle: hormones operate at extremely low concentrations. You don't need a lot to cause disruption. You just need enough, often enough. Indoor environments add another layer. Modern buildings trap air. Furniture, flooring, electronics, cleaning agents all release compounds into enclosed spaces. You don't smell them, you don't see them, but you inhale them for hours every day. This is why exposure is not a lifestyle choice. It's an environmental condition. You don't opt in, you're born into it. Now here's where things get uncomfortable, but also empowering. The reason these compounds are everywhere is not because anyone hates you. It's because systems optimize for what they measure. Industry measures cost, efficiency, durability, scalability. Biology measures harmony, rhythm, feedback, and balance. When those two measurement systems collide, biology loses unless someone intervenes. That someone is you. I want to reframe this moment in history because it's easy to see yourself as a victim of modernity. I don't see that. I see an unprecedented opportunity. Never before have individuals had this level of information, choice, and leverage. But leverage only works if you use it. This is where people get stuck. They think awareness requires total overhaul. New house, new city, new life. That's not how systems change. Systems change through pressure at key points. Think again like an investor. You don't fix a broken portfolio by selling everything at once. You identify toxic assets. You stop reinvesting in them. You redirect cash flow toward assets that compound. The same applies here. Start with what enters your body most frequently and most directly. Skin, mouth, lungs. These are the high leverage points. Switching a few daily use products can dramatically reduce exposure. Changing how food is stored and heated can eliminate a major source of estrogenic input. Improving air and water quality doesn't require perfection, just intention. What surprises most people is how quickly the body responds when interference is reduced. Not because the body suddenly becomes stronger, but because it was never weak to begin with. Weakness was imposed. Here's a mindset shift that changes everything. Your body is not struggling to function. It's struggling to adapt to a hostile signal environment. Remove the hostility, and function returns. This is also where motivation changes tone. Fear-based motivation burns out. Ownership-based motivation compounds. When people understand that every small decision is a vote for clarity or confusion, they stop asking for motivation and start acting from alignment. Alignment is powerful because it doesn't require willpower. It requires honesty. Honesty about what convenience is costing you. Honesty about what a normal really means. Honesty about whether your daily environment supports the future you claim to want. And yes, this applies to finances too. Poor health is one of the most expensive conditions a person can carry. Not just in medical bills, but in lost energy, lost focus, lost time, lost opportunity. People chase money while hemorrhaging vitality, not realizing vitality is the multiplier that makes money useful. There is no financial freedom without physical capacity. No legacy without longevity. No success without stamina. Every estrogenic burden you reduce is not just a health win, it's an economic win. Fewer interventions, fewer dependencies, more autonomy, more optionality. This is why I reject the idea that health-conscious choices are luxuries. They are investments. And like all good investments, they pay dividends quietly at first, then unmistakably. You don't need to convince anyone else. You don't need permission. Systems don't change because everyone agrees. They change because enough individuals opt out of what no longer serves them. As awareness spreads, markets respond. Products improve. Standards rise. This is how real progress happens, not through regulation alone, but through informed demand. In the next part, we'll talk about the psychological resistance to this information, why people push back, why discomfort arises, and how to move forward without becoming isolated, obsessive, or extreme. Because the goal is not to escape modern life. The goal is to navigate it intelligently with your biology intact. At this point, something interesting usually happens, not in the body, but in the mind. When people begin to understand estrogenic exposure and its implications, the resistance doesn't always come from outside, it comes from inside. A subtle tightening, a quiet discomfort, a desire to argue, minimize, or postpone action. That reaction is not ignorance, it's psychology. Human beings don't resist information because it's false. They resist it because it threatens identity, routine, and social belonging. And modern health decisions are deeply social. What you eat, what you use, how you live, these are signals to the tribe. Questioning those signals can feel risky. Most people don't want the truth if it implies inconvenience. They want reassurance. They want confirmation that everything is fine and will remain fine without change. That's not stupidity. That's survival instinct misapplied to a modern environment. Our brains evolved to prioritize short-term safety over long-term outcomes. In the ancestral world, that made sense. Today, it's a liability. Here's a hard truth. The discomfort you feel when learning this is not a warning sign, it's a growth signal. Discomfort means your mental model is being updated, and updated models lead to better decisions if you don't shut them down prematurely. One of the most common traps people fall into is perfectionism disguised as skepticism. They say things like, if I can't avoid everything, why bother avoiding anything? That's not logic. That's avoidance. No serious investor refuses to invest because risk exists. They manage risk. They reduce exposure to known liabilities. They don't demand certainty. They demand advantage. Health works the same way. You don't need to eliminate estrogenic exposure. You need to reduce it enough for your biology to regain signal clarity. And clarity, once restored, creates momentum. Another psychological barrier is social friction. People worry about being that person, the one who reads labels, the one who asks questions, the one who opts out. Here's what I want you to understand. Every meaningful shift in history began with people willing to look unreasonable to those benefiting from the status quo. Choosing cleaner inputs is not a rejection of society, it's a refinement of participation. You can live in the modern world without letting it rewrite your biology. This is where emotional maturity matters. You don't need to preach. You don't need to convert. You don't need to justify. Quiet consistency speaks louder than arguments. When people see your energy stabilize, your clarity sharpen, your resilience return, they ask questions. Influence earned through embodiment is the only influence that lasts. Another form of resistance comes disguised as humility. People say, "Who am I to think I know better than institutions?" But institutions don't have bodies. You do. Institutions optimize averages. You live with outcomes. Blind trust is not humility. It's abdication. Real humility is recognizing that complex systems require constant reassessment and that lived experience is valid data. Now let's address the fear of becoming obsessive. This fear is understandable, especially in a culture that swings between apathy and extremism. But obsession doesn't come from caring. It comes from anxiety without direction. Direction solves obsession. When you understand which changes matter most, you stop fixating on trivial details. You focus on leverage, you act decisively, then move on. This is where many people get it wrong. They chase purity instead of clarity. Purity is impossible. Clarity is enough. Clarity means knowing which inputs disrupt your system and choosing alternatives when feasible. It doesn't mean moralizing. It doesn't mean fear. It means discernment. Discernment is calm. It's strategic. It's sustainable. Here's another financial principle worth borrowing. You don't check your investments every hour. You set a strategy, automate what you can, and let compounding do the work. Health decisions should feel the same way. Once you remove major estrogenic exposures, you don't need to think about them constantly. The system runs in the background quietly supporting you. What drains people is not change, it's indecision. Once a choice becomes identity aligned, it stops costing energy. It becomes default. There's also grief in this process, and it deserves acknowledgement. Grief for the belief that modern life was neutral. Grief for trust misplaced. Grief for health struggles that now make sense in hindsight. Grief is not weakness, it's integration. You don't move forward by pretending you never believed what you believed. You move forward by updating your understanding and acting accordingly. This is also where compassion matters. Not everyone is ready. Not everyone has the resources, bandwidth, or support to change immediately. Awareness without compassion turns into arrogance. Arrogance isolates. Compassion builds momentum. Start where you are. Do what you can. Expand as capacity grows. Remember, the goal is not to be right. The goal is to be well. As this information settles, something powerful begins to happen. You stop seeing health as a battle and start seeing it as cooperation. You're no longer fighting your body, you're partnering with it. Partnership changes tone. It replaces force with feedback. Control with coordination, and coordination is what hormones were designed for. In the next part, we'll shift from psychology to action. Not checklists, not dogma, but principles that guide intelligent, flexible choices in a world that isn't going to get simpler. Because the future belongs to those who can think clearly in complex environments, and that starts with clear signals inside the body. By now, the question is no longer whether this matters. The question is how to live with this knowledge without becoming rigid, overwhelmed, or detached from the world you still have to operate in. This is where principles matter more than rules. Rules break under pressure. principles adapt? I want to give you a way of thinking that scales, not just for health, but for life. The first principle is subtraction before addition. Modern culture teaches us to add fixes, supplements, protocols, hacks, but biology responds fastest when you remove interference. Before you try to boost anything, ask what's suppressing it. Energy doesn't usually need stimulation. It needs permission. Who needs permission? When estrogenic noise decreases, systems reassert themselves naturally. Testosterone doesn't need to be forced. Metabolism doesn't need to be tricked. Mood doesn't need to be numbed. The body already knows what to do when signals are clean. This is deeply countercultural because it doesn't sell well. There's no drama in removal, no heroism in avoidance. But there is power in restraint. Restraint is not deprivation, it's selectivity. The second principle is frequency beats intensity. What you do occasionally matters far less than what you do repeatedly. A single clean meal won't restore hormonal balance. A single exposure won't destroy it either. Systems are shaped by patterns. This is freeing once you understand it. You don't need perfect days. You need consistent ones. Daily inputs determine hormonal tone. That tone determines how your body interprets stress, food, sleep, and effort. Change the tone and everything downstream becomes easier. The third principle is environment beats willpower. Willpower is a finite resource. Environments operate automatically. If your environment constantly pushes estrogenic exposure, you will eventually comply, no matter how motivated you are. So the intelligent move is not to become stronger than your environment, but to redesign it. Store food in materials that don't leach signals. Use products that don't interfere with hormones. Improve air and water quality where possible. These are not daily decisions. They are one-time upgrades that pay dividends every day. This is exactly how financially literate people think. They automate good decisions and remove friction from beneficial behavior. Health is not a test of discipline, it's a test of design. The fourth principle is resilience over optimization. Optimization assumes stability. Modern life is not stable. Travel, stress, social obligations, unexpected demands, these are constants. Resilient systems don't collapse when conditions change. They absorb variation. Reducing estrogenic burden increases resilience. Hormonal systems regain flexibility. Stress responses normalize. Recovery improves. You become less fragile. Fragility is expensive. It costs time, money, and opportunity. This is why health freedom mirrors financial freedom. Both are about reducing fragility and increasing optionality. When your body works with you, not against you, you have choices. You can work harder when needed, rest when appropriate, travel without crashing, adapt without breaking. That's real wealth. Another principle worth naming is long-term thinking in a short-term world. Estrogenic exposure is appealing because it's invisible now and costly later. Clean choices are sometimes inconvenient now and beneficial later. This asymmetry tricks people. Humans discount the future by default, but the people who win financially, physically, psychologically are the ones who override that bias. They don't live for tomorrow at the expense of today. They live in a way where today doesn't sabotage tomorrow. Here's a line I often return to: if a decision makes today easier but tomorrow harder, it's probably a bad deal. Once you adopt this lens, choices simplify. You stop negotiating with yourself. You stop needing motivation. You act from coherence. There's also an identity shift that happens here, and it's subtle but profound. You stop seeing yourself as someone trying to be healthy and start seeing yourself as someone who protects signal integrity. That identity scales. It applies to sleep, work, relationships, finances. Clear signals create clear outcomes everywhere. Noise creates chaos everywhere. This is also where leadership enters the conversation. Not leadership as authority, but leadership as example. When you embody clarity, you become a reference point. You don't have to announce it. People feel it. Energy becomes steadier. Reactions become measured. Decisions become cleaner. That presence influences rooms more than arguments ever could. And here's the part that often surprises people. This path doesn't make life smaller. It makes it bigger. When your body is not constantly compensating, you have more capacity for ambition, creativity, and contribution. You stop spending energy managing symptoms and start investing it in purpose. Purpose thrives in healthy systems. One more financial parallel before we move on. The best investments are often boring. Index funds, infrastructure, systems that quietly compound. Hormonal health is boring in the same way until it's gone. What you're doing here is protecting infrastructure, the biological foundation that everything else depends on. Ignore it and everything costs more. Protect it and everything becomes easier. In the final part, we'll bring this together, not with fear, not with rigidity, but with a vision of what's possible when individuals reclaim biological clarity in a world that desperately needs it. Because this isn't just about avoiding harm. It's about creating strength that lasts. By the time we reach this point, something fundamental should feel different, not urgent, not anxious, clear. Because clarity is what remains when confusion is removed, and clarity is the most valuable asset you can carry into an uncertain future. We began with the idea that health is not failing randomly. It is responding intelligently to the signals it receives. We traced how estrogenic interference distorts those signals, how that distortion accumulates quietly, and how normalization turns warning signs into background noise. We explored the sources, the psychology, and the principles that allow you to act without becoming extreme. Now I want to talk about what all of this is really for. This is not about avoiding illness. Avoidance is a low bar. This is about capacity. About what becomes possible when your body is no longer busy compensating for confusion. A clear hormonal environment doesn't just reduce risk. It expands range of energy, range of focus, range of emotional regulation, range of effort you can apply without collapse. In a world that demands adaptability, range is everything. The people who navigate them well will not be the most informed or the most outraged. They will be the most regulated. Regulated bodies produce regulated minds. This is why biological clarity is not a private luxury. It's a public good. Clear-thinking individuals stabilize families, organizations, and communities. They don't overreact. They don't burn out easily. They don't collapse under sustained pressure. This is leadership in its most fundamental form. I want to revisit the idea of freedom one last time. Financial freedom is often framed as escape from work, obligation, dependence. Health freedom is different. It's about engagement, the ability to participate fully without being drained by the cost of participation. When your biology is clear, effort feels cleaner, stress resolves faster. Recovery is reliable. You don't fear exertion because your system can handle it. That confidence changes how you show up. And here's the quiet truth that rarely gets said. Many modern limitations are not due to lack of talent or intelligence. They're due to compromised capacity. People burn bright, but not long. They start strong, but fade early. That's not ambition failing. That's infrastructure failing. You've spent this journey learning how to protect that infrastructure. Not perfectly, not obsessively, but intelligently. I don't want you leaving this with a checklist. I want you leaving with a compass, a way to evaluate decisions as life changes. Ask simple questions. Does this choice reduce noise or add to it? Does it support rhythm or disrupt it? Does it make the future easier or harder? These questions scale across decades. There will never be a moment when modern life becomes hormonally friendly by default, but there will always be people who adapt ahead of the curve. Those people don't wait for permission. They don't need consensus. They act when understanding arrives, and understanding has arrived. If there's one message I want to leave you with, it's this. Your body is not fragile. It's responsive. Treat it with clarity, and it will reward you with resilience. Resilience is the real advantage. It's what allows you to build, to recover, to lead, and to last. This is not about living in fear of the environment. It's about refusing to be defined by it. Every generation inherits a world shaped by the choices of those before it. You now understand how those choices reach beyond culture and economics into biology itself. What you do with that understanding matters. Quietly, daily, compounding, and years from now, when strength feels earned instead of borrowed, when energy feels reliable instead of rationed, when clarity feels natural instead of forced, you won't think back to this as a warning. You'll think of it as a turning point, not because the world changed, but because you did.